When I talk about non-duality, I'm often specifically referring to an insight about the non-dualistic knowing or realization of what we call the senses, sound being none other than the awareness of sound. The sense of there being a subject experiencing objects of perception like sound and sensation, and objects in the apparent three-dimensional world, seeing through that illusion and experiencing things or experiencing phenomenon or experiencing appearances without the subject-object split, without the experience actually of an experiencer, without the experience of an experiencer. So even experience is saying too much. This I've talked about many times, and I'm sure I'll talk about it many more. That's this specific meaning of non-duality usually when I use the term. There are other ways of using the term, of course. There's contemporary, a sort of contemporary genre online that would be called non-duality. That's a little bit more of a speaking style. And many people use the term in other ways beyond that as well. But I do want to point out that the realization that dualistic processing, dualistic experience is fundamentally flawed really exists at all levels, or can be realized at various levels and into various levels of subtlety. For instance, there are ways of speaking that would say that the idea of practice, the idea of spiritual practice or spiritual journey or spiritual seeking is inherently dualistic. Even saying that is the problem, that's the problem that makes you suffer. I would say that's a bit naive, because the seeking is already there. The seeking mechanism is very profound and very powerful before you even learn anything about spirituality. So it's not the fault of the spiritual flavor of seeking that this suffering that's inherent to that dualistic experience, the experience of a will separate from everything that's always trying to find its way, always trying to find its completion. It's not the fault of the spiritual world, so to speak, that happens. It's just already happening by the time you find the spiritual doctrine or transmissions and so forth. The mechanism is deeply rooted and starts early in life. It may be the case, and perhaps often is the case, that the sort of last type of dualistic seeking that occurs is spiritual seeking, because perhaps by that time we've sort of put everything aside. We've thoroughly digested that what we might call the materialistic seeking avenues are not going to deliver the goods. So we put it all on the spiritual process. We put it all on enlightenment, and then we focus our seeking energy, or focus our dualistic drive to control, however you want to say it. We focus that onto what we call spirituality, what we call enlightenment. Of course, it's not enlightenment that we're pointing to with that. It's just the internal struggle with a different flavor. That's all it is. It's also not. We're also not clear on what true spiritual, the spiritual possibility, if conveyed by someone who actually knows it, someone who has realized that's not what we're actually engaging yet. It's there. It perhaps is even driving the process underneath, but what we're engaging with the mind is still more of the same. It's more of our own perception of not enough, so I'm going to get I'm going to create a situation, or get to some place, or get to some finality where I finally feel enough, or I don't feel not enough, perhaps. And that seeking, that drive, that dualistic grasping goes on and on for some time. When that collapses, however that happens, may happen in small steps, it may happen in one big sort of collapse. But when the dualistic experience collapses, the feeling, the I guess almost instinct. I use the word instinct differently, but it's almost an instinct because it feels so real, that we're going to find completion somehow through effort, through pushing, through imposing our own idea of what could be onto what is. At some point that will stop. And when it does stop, wonder of wonders, the truth is revealed to have already been, to have always been, to have been right here the whole time, clearly. And what's interesting is, even at that point, there can be subtle threads of identity that I'll say it this way, there can be subtle threads of identity that, even if it doesn't feel like you necessarily, doesn't feel like an entity, or doesn't feel like a reified consciousness or awareness or something, there can still be these tendencies to turn the realization into something, even if it's just a message or a way of speaking or a specific type of expression. Perhaps a sort of transcendent truth. And it makes sense that that would happen. It sort of feels like what you've always been after, going beyond the self, going beyond personal suffering, going beyond duality, and then you arrive at some kind of transcendent truth or transcendent wisdom. And it's talked about, like you hear the term transcendent wisdom and so forth. It can be overlooked very easily, actually, for this reason. But it's also not the final position, because a very subtle duality can still be at play. And essentially what that is, and what that looks like, is the duality between enlightenment, or the enlightened truth, not even a personal enlightenment, just the truth of enlightenment, the truth of Brahman, the truth of Buddha nature, however you want to say that, truth of mind with a capital M, and ordinary life, suffering, unenlightened life, day-to-day, mundane. However we divide that, we could divide that in a lot of ways. The sacred and the mundane, the organic and the artificial. And even these subtle dualistic tendencies, dualistic beliefs, will be challenged one way or another. But like other holding places along this process, there is a way to sort of overlook that, I suppose, and kind of stay there, because it's a very, actually rather comfortable place to be. But as we return back to the starting place in a lot of ways, to the relative, not negating the absolute at all, but finding the absolute within the relative again and again and again and again in more and more nuanced ways. We find something rather miraculous. That is, that the realization didn't just occur once for you, or for not you. It's occurring all the time. It's occurring in subtlety. It's occurring within everything and everyone you come into contact with. Everything is coming into its own truth all the time, at every level. And this opens up a tremendous amount of availability. And this is only a provisional way of speaking now, because I can't speak without words about this. But the Dharma vehicle, I'll say, it appears everywhere. It appears in everything. It appears as its infinitely flexible, infinitely adaptable nature. So it appears in that which feels to be the truly mundane. Another way of saying this is we find that at some point we see clearly what it was that made us wake up, what it was that made it so we have to wake up. The suffering that's very specific to us, that's also shared among humanity, but it's very specific to us. That's why we woke up. That's why we had to wake up. That's what the impetus, the fire, that's what we had to transcend. And we find at some point we go right back into it because we have to. We have to explore it in precise detail because there's nothing left to do. Nothing left to do. And there's a transmission that occurs through doing that. You may never know how that transmission is working. Again, the sort of Dharma vehicle is rather mysterious, but it has a profound and powerful function. I might even call it a return to ordinariness. A return to ordinariness that's so thorough that you can't even perceive yourself as anything other than ordinary. It's again very paradoxical here, because the truth of no self is also very clear still. But as I mentioned a couple of days ago, with the realization of no self, we might perceive that means that you walk around and move through the world like experiencing yourself as a nothingness or a ghost or something. It's not like that. It's more like anything can be inhabited because there's no limitation. There's no avoidance of anything. Self was constructed out of avoidance. So when that's gone, there's no avoidance. There's no self, but there's no avoidance either. There's no avoidance of any perception, any misperception, any aspect of suffering at any level. So it's an unhindered penetration, an unhindered exploration of everything in the human dimension, everything in the transcendent dimension, and seeing, knowing, and thoroughly integrating how those don't separate. They can't come apart. This is a deeper realization of non-duality in a way of speaking. You doing okay? Yeah. Anything? Yeah. Eshwar said it really well. He said, once you go through, there's nothing left to do but go through it again. Which is kind of true. That's an act of compassion that you can't take on voluntarily. Someone else said, you may aspire to being a bodhisattva, but be careful what you ask for. And yet, everything radiates with this freeing this message of freedom to feel everything at every scale, which can be completely overwhelming to the self. And that's why, luckily, at some point you will transcend that, or the self will essentially be seen to have been a mirage the whole time. But then the capacity for experience is tremendous. All experience. I don't know why I always think of this quote from a movie when I talk about this, but it's from a horror movie, actually. It's from an old one, Hellraiser. And the Cenobites are these bizarre creatures from who knows where. And one of this character in the movie said, I thought I had gone to the limits. I was wrong. The Cenobites showed me experience beyond limits, pleasure and pain inseparable. It's kind of like that, actually, at some point. It can be very intense, energetically, physically. But again, when there's nothing trying to put the lid on the container anymore, it's also kind of all right, even though there's a lot moving through, a lot of energy. Some people get extreme kundalini, some people get intense pain states, and it's all transient, of course. And there is a sort of way that you learn again and again to just penetrate it into this sort of boundless clarity, but it doesn't take the texture away either. Like I said this morning, the textures, even though they're empty, still remain. The textures of experience. And then, as Adyashanti says, and he has said a lot of very, very wise things. And one that he has said, I've heard him say multiple times, is at some point there's really nothing left to do that makes any sense other than to be a benevolent force in the world, or a benevolent presence in the world, right? And of course, that could be totally misinterpreted and totally co-opted without realization, which ties back to my other favorite quote by my own teacher. He said, realization is ultimately, when all is said and done, is about living out of your heart, your tender and loving heart. His point was not just that part. His point was that you have to have both sides of this. He said, without realization, without insight, you'll think you're living out of the innermost promptings of your loving heart. You'll be living out of the outermost promptings of your deluded ego. And as funny as that sounds, if you want to see what that looks like, just look out into the world and see people who think they're doing good and commit tremendous amounts of violence upon the world, upon themselves, and upon other people and animals. And and you look and you go, how can someone be that unconscious, right? Well, if you want to know how someone can be that unconscious, look inside. This is the answer. Look how you could become that unconscious, or at least unconscious. That's when we realize how much work we have to do, and you realize why my teacher said it that way. Without realization, you can think you're doing a great job and really be harming, others in some way or another. The ego is very good at having a view that looks this way and avoids this over here. So stay open, in this way. Stay humble. Stay open to insight, clarifying again and again and again and again and again. And your bandwidth for experience to widen without resistance. And to coalesce and synergize naturally more and more with the natural way, the natural movements. Just like Taoism is so clear on this. It's so beautiful. But without the insights, without what I talk about all the time, awakening. I think there are people out there who want to just eliminate the awakening, but talk about all the spiritual stuff. I see them in my comments sometimes, The vast majority of people who comment on my videos are very sincere, but I see it, and I can feel it. What they're trying to do. They're trying to bypass it, trying to not do the scary thing, trying not to let go of what they think they know. It doesn't work, that turns into religion, turns into collective ego in one form or another. And that's what we're up against out there and in here. So I have tremendous respect for Zen, and Dzogchen, Christian mysticism, Sufism. The ideas, not the ideas, the prompting of those collectives, and the promptings that say you have to go beyond what you know about yourself. You are the limitation. You are the sticking point. You're the fixation. I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot of people say that the AA book of AA, I don't remember what it's called, but there's the main book with Alcoholics Anonymous, has a lot about identity actually. You realize you are the problem. You are the problem. You don't have a problem. You are the problem. Very similar. Paul Hederman talks a lot about this. He talks about it very clearly and with a lot of powerful transmission about the recovery process and how it relates to the awakening process. And I think he says the worst addiction of all is the addiction to self. Far more than all, the potent drugs and alcohol, which I think is absolutely true. It is definitely the root of all addiction. It's also the root of all suffering, the root of all delusion, the root of all illusion, the root of all self-deception, the root of all self-hatred, the root of all projecting that self-hatred outwardly, unconsciously, and causing violence. And we can investigate it directly. We can look right here, inward, with a questioning heart, with an open heart, with a spirit of discovery, but with a willingness. We have to have a willingness to feel what you're going to feel to do that. And it will be uncomfortable at times. And probably even more important than that, the bigger barrier than the discomfort of it is the unknown aspect of it. Really deters some people. You're going into the unknown here. You're facing the unknown right now. And you're even listening to something like this or engaging this process. You're nose to nose with the unknown. Whether you know it or not. It's there and it's staring you in the face and part of you knows it. So what are you going to do there? You're going to solidify? You're going to solidify your identity? Or are you going to let go? Who knows? Right now, you can't choose probably, but you can keep coming back up nose to nose with it. You can keep being honest with yourself and realize yeah, I'm the cause of my problems. I'm the cause of my own self-delusion, of course. And I trust that there is something, a truth that is not based in delusion. A way of experiencing the world that's not based in delusion. I trust that. So maybe this whole kind of talk can sound nihilistic or heavy or something, but it's really good news that there is something you can trust beyond the deluded, inner world that you've inherited through no fault of your own, actually. Again, Paul Hederman, he says the thought system is a failed system. Once you see that it's failed, why do you keep using it? Just totally true. If you ever want to have a good time, go see Paul Hederman. He's such a great guy. You can go sit in his audience and I did it. I've been there a few times with him and I just laughed the whole time. He's so funny. He's actually very funny. Being around him is even better because you just feel it, So whether someone takes up a practice or no practice, I don't care. That's not what concerns me. But I am concerned with whether someone overlooks the truth of what I just said, that there is a barrier and you are the barrier. To just put yourself to sleep with the idea that there's nothing to do. That's, just a different form of delusion in my experience. If the words come from true realization that there's nothing to do, great. But the same words can be used in very different contexts. That's why words are tricky. Words are slippery. So I focus on the insight. I point to the insight over and over and over and over, and I will again and again and again. Because without that, this stuff can become totally conceptual very quickly. It can become meaningless. Without the transformation, it is meaningless. And again, there are people out there on YouTube who speak about this in such a way that there's no one there. The seeker is the problem. There's nowhere to go. There's putting effort into practice is just reifying a seeker that's, distorting the truth that's right here all the time anyway. And all of that is true. But every single one of those people have gone through an insight transformation, every single one of them, if they have the insight, and many do. So don't overlook that. To me, it's absurd to overlook that. So without the insight itself, and it's a profound insight, then the words can be very, very tricky. They can really delude people. Or they can just add to the delusion. Or just add to our comfort that says, I don't really want to go into the unknown. I like the spiritual talk. I like the unity talk. I like the freedom. I talk about freedom and it makes me feel kind of good and stuff. But I don't really want to move into the unknown. I don't really want to let go of the safe ideas that I have about myself. That's fine. I have no problem with that, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's just not what I'm talking about. That's just more of the same, rearranging thoughts. And at some point everyone hopefully will realize that rearranging thoughts is not helpful. It doesn't get to the core of what's going on here. It just doesn't. And you can be very persuasive with yourself and others about the way you do that too. There are deceptive leaders out there, deceptive leaders in spirituality and so forth that, they're good at it. They're good at rearranging thoughts. They're good at telling you what you want to hear. They're good at persuasion and all. That's just more of the problem to me, There's something really, this is a bit of an aside. I'm kind of going on a tangent, but there's something fascinating about, say human nature, but it's like the way humans communicate. That you can have a whole bunch of people that seem to be talking about the same thing or seem to be listening to the same thing, but they can have very different motivations, actually. And you may not even really notice it unless you have really discerning attention on them or something. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating, actually. Again, I wrote about it in the book a little bit, where if somebody's truly, antisocial, basically doesn't have a conscience or has a sort of personality disorder, they could learn to use the terminology like spirituality and peace and unity and love, and they can very easily learn that specifically to manipulate people. And then they go find the people that are manipulatable, filter them out, and bring them in, and you got yourself a cult, and it's really sad. But again, that's just a collective version of the tyranny that goes on in our own egos and our own minds. That collective delusion and self-delusion is the point of what we're actually engaging and what we're realizing we have to go beyond, which ultimately will come down to letting go at some point. But you may need to, and often do need to, concentrate your effort to get to that point. Concentrate your effort of discernment. Concentrate your effort of inquiry. Concentrate your effort of questioning. Or just get tired of the same old ways of thinking, the ways of perceiving yourself. That's what it was for me. It was just like, I could tell it wasn't working. It wasn't working. Kind of worked. It kind of works in its own way. It works in the collective, if you're around people who also think that way and perceive themselves in a certain way, and they'll give you complicity, you can give them complicity. It kind of works there, kind of. What it doesn't do, at least it didn't for me, was it didn't deliver deep peace. It didn't deliver a sense of things actually being okay. It didn't deliver a sense of being in the right place at the right time, having a sense of like, I don't want to say belonging. I think belonging is more the ego's version of it, but it's more of a sense of what we think belonging is going to give us, what we think specialness is going to give us, what we think validation is going to give us. What we're really looking for is this kind of sort of knowing your place in the universe instinctually, just feeling like everything is in synchronicity, that's possible to know that, to just live it. And to trust yourself, not move with hesitation all the time, but to trust yourself when to move, when to not move, when to speak, when not to speak, not second guessing, moving with fluidity, moving with a sense of freedom. And then going where that takes you. It sounds like it's like you in that, you participating in that, but ultimately it all sort of coalesces into something that's doesn't have any specific or separate individual in it. And it's just a total naturalness that's available. But I couldn't find anything close to that through the world of thinking, doubting, analyzing, trying to fit in, trying to figure out what to do, what to be, who to be, how to think about myself. All of that was exhausting, and it just didn't work at all for what I'm talking about, for the deep peace, the sense of okayness. That boy, when I was a young adult, I don't remember even feeling it, but I had the instinct that it was possible. That's for sure. I had the instinct that there was a possibility like that. Peace, synchronicity, freedom. So again, that's the kind of miracle that this is available to anyone. But you do kind of go on blind faith, I think, at some point. And then that's like your entry point into the unknown. There is, not to criticize like structured religion or anything, but I see it sometimes in even conversations I've had with people. There's a sort of fear sometimes in institutional religion of letting go of beliefs. And it's like, well, if you don't know what you believe, that's dangerous, right? You know, the devil can jump into you and take you over or something. I don't know. Like literally we'll say things like that. Or if you don't have a strong enough belief or conviction in God or something. But that's just fear. That's just a fear of actually letting go. You know, even staying within the framework of a religion, you know, if you want to know God, you have to let go of your ideas of God and your ideas of yourself. But fear sneaks into a lot of group dynamics and institutional dynamics and so forth. Yeah. So no matter where you are, what you believe or don't believe, letting go of beliefs, at least for a time, so that you can actually drop into something that's not belief-based at all, or wake up to something that's not belief-based at all, is a worthwhile undertaking for anyone, in my experience.